Well, hello, my name's Louise Savage and an extremely warm welcome to my channel. Welcome back if you are a returning viewer, and an equally warm welcome if you are watching my musings, wafflings, ramblings for the very first time. Simon and I launched our Savage prompts for 2024 back at the beginning of January. It's now mid to late January. And there was quite a lot of dismay around the choice of our very first prompt of the year, which was to read, for January, to read a book with a snake on the cover. And in case you're not aware of what reading prompts are, it's basically the idea that every month there is a prompt, a suggestion of something that you might read, see it as a challenge if you like, and you have to go off and look at your bookshelves or go to your local library or bookshop and try and select a book that fits the brief and then give it a read. And I absolutely love it because it makes me read books that have been on my shelves for far too long. Very often I've come around to them and really enjoyed them. And also just look at your own bookshelves and book shopping a little bit differently. It certainly gives a different slant, for example, when you go shopping in a charity shop for books like I did yesterday. Anyway, I was really lucky because it just so happened, and that we had no idea of this, well, Simon couldn't possibly have had any idea of this when he bought it me, but for Christmas, Simon actually gave me Mary Beard's book, Emperor of Rome. Now, for those of you who have not come across, and as you can see, there is an eagle with a snake wrapped around it to symbolise the emperor's dominance. So on the front of this book, so it absolutely fits with the prompt beautifully, which made life very easy for me, I have to say. So anyway, I probably, if I'm absolutely honest, when he gave me this book, I probably would have seen myself reading it much later in the year. I wouldn't have necessarily picked it up in January. And actually he did me a huge favour there, and the prompts did me a huge favour there, because I have picked it up in January and I am absolutely, totally enthralled by this book. And there are lots of reasons for that, which I'll explain, but it's made me feel quite passionate about it. It's made me want to waffle on about it to you lot. The first thing to say is that if you're not aware of who Mary Beard is a classicist. She's exactly 10 years older than I am. She grew up in Much Wenlock in Shropshire, which is only less than 20 miles from where I'm sitting now. And she was educated initially in a state school. So her route to become a classics professor was not necessarily very obvious at the time, because the phrase stale, male and pale could well be used of the classicists of that generation which preceded Mary Beard. So she's very rare, even now, as a female professor of classics. And she has made lots of fantastic TV programmes about the classical world. She's certainly raised renewed interest and engagement in the ancient world. And she's also a really passionate, unashamed feminist. So there is lots to love about this woman. I think she's an incredible communicator. I love listening to her. I love watching her. She enjoys telling stories. She understands that one of the best ways of engaging and enjoying the classical world is to think about the narratives around the people who lived at the time. And it is the people that she's sort of focused on. It's kind of everyday life or Roman life that fascinates her, perhaps more than some of the literary works that are celebrated as being, paragons of classical literature. So that's Mary Beard. Now, when I started reading this, it's quite a while since I read anything of hers. I've read some of her feminist literature, and I've obviously read some of her books around classics, although I haven't yet read SPQR, which I must get on to do, or indeed her book about the Roman triumph. So actually that's galvanized me. Now I think another reason that I've enjoyed reading this at this point, and this is again very personal, I apologize, I will get onto the content of the book in a minute, is the fact that I'm a classicist myself. I've just retired, as you may know, and actually I think that ordinarily I'd have been reading this and it would just been like an adjunct to my day job. The difference now is that I'm actually missing that academic stimulation, and therefore I think I've been reading this in quite a different way, probably a more leisurely way, probably seeking out, not seeking out detail that I know might be useful for my students, but actually genuinely enjoying the classical detail for my own consumption. And I hadn't thought about that. I hadn't thought about how for decades now I've been filtering the classical world, or my understanding of it, slightly in order to aid the people that I educate. So I'm learning a lot about myself as I'm reading this. Anyway, so it's called Emperor of Rome, and it's not a cover-to-cover, blow-by-blow account of every Roman emperor there ever was, their life, their history. It is nothing of the sort. What I absolutely love about this book is that it takes a kind of thematic approach, although that's a bit unfair to state it like that, because it's so cleverly done. And she sort of goes through various aspects of the life of an emperor and really tries to reassess what it might mean. And I've learned lots and lots and lots of things. Every page there'll be something that she drops in. I think, wow, I'd never thought about that before, or I wasn't aware of that about that particular emperor. So I'm learning loads as I read it. So take an example. She looks, for example, about how you become a Roman emperor, all the different routes that you might take, either deliberately or very often inadvertently, to gain that title. One emperor, for example, I did not know this, actually paid to become an emperor for a very short period. So I found all of that interesting. You know, what were the criteria, if any? She looks at things like ancient dining and the Roman emperors' dining rooms. There are hundreds of them, probably more, dotted around the ancient world. I've been to a fair few of them myself and visited them. And, you know, she looks at the mythology around those spaces. She looks at what they tell us about power. And I think more than anything, Mary Beard is very, very interested in power dynamics, whether that be the dynamic of the autocratic ruler over the people, or whether it be the dynamic of gender, or whatever it might be. She's very, very fascinated by power dynamic, as am I, which is another reason why I'm loving this book. So she looks at the dining spaces. She looks at the palaces themselves, you know, these huge sprawling palaces, which are really difficult to make sense of because of all the subsequent layers of building that have taken place afterwards, the plundering that's happened, the incompetence of various archaeologists from the past. And she tries to make sense of these spaces, not in terms particularly of what they look like, but actually how they function, the mechanisms. And I think one of the things I love, and I'm saying that word a lot because I do really love this book, one of the things I really enjoy about reading the likes of Mary Beard and Edith Hall, who's another fantastic female professor of classics in this country, is that we're giving this ancient world a female scrutiny that hasn't really happened before. So, for example, when she's writing about Roman dining spaces and she discusses the sort of various ideas that we have through modern cinema and through classical texts themselves about what dining might have been like in the ancient world, the ostentation of it, you know, a peacock stuffed with a chicken, stuffed with a dormouse, stuffed with a whatever. You get the idea. And she stands back and just completely undermines that whole concept by saying, but where were the kitchens? Because she's noticed that in you know, these huge palaces that the emperors built, the kitchens were tiny. Where was the space for the preparation of all this grand food? And then sort of ask the question, well, maybe these dishes were prepared, but they're probably not on the scale. They might be one-off, sensational additions to the dinner table, but not on the scale that we've come to assume through the mythology that's built up around these spaces. And I do think, and maybe, accuse me of being sexist in my outlook, but I think it takes perhaps the female gaze to start to unstitch those questions. And I mean that, I'm a feminist, but I want to take men with me. I don't mean that in a disrespectful way towards men. So I hope I don't have many male viewers, but I do have some, and I really hope you won't take that the wrong way. It's not how it's intended. It's just that idea of a fresh pair of eyes with perhaps a slightly different way of looking at the world. So at the moment, I'm reading a chapter, because I haven't finished it yet. At the moment, I'm reading a chapter about the people in the palaces. She wants to know who was there, the slaves, for example. And I've just been reading about Hadrian's palace at Tivoli, just about 20 miles outside of Rome. I've not been there yet. I really want to go. And it's this enormous purpose-built palace. It was built within a couple of years during Hadrian's reign. And there are miles and miles of underground corridors. And those underground corridors are there, she assumes, so that the slaves could come and go without being seen. I mean, it's just mind-blowing. A culture that goes to those efforts to conceal the work that's going on behind the scenes to make everything look seamless and effortless, and to hide the people who are actually doing all the hard graft. She looks at the relationships between the emperors and their own personal slaves, some of whom were incredibly powerful, some of whom were really badly mistreated, some of whom were used as sex toys. So she's putting these often these characters who are often unseen in the histories that we read of the ancient world front and centre. She's also asking really good questions about what the Roman emperor's wives and the women who lived in the palaces have to tell us about, and particularly, again, the legends, the mythology that's arisen around those women, what that has to tell us about how ancient women were perceived, and makes the point that during the Roman Republic, the women really seen and not heard was kind of the ideal Roman woman. In fact, perhaps not even seen. But the rise of imperial power meant that the emperor's wives, some of them did reach quite high status, did have influence. They could write a letter to a previous emperor and change their mind about something. And, if you've ever been, as I'm lucky enough to have been, to the western coast of Turkey, you'll know that there are an awful lot of building works that on archaeological sites that are attributed to these emperors' wives, that were funded by them. So they must have had some, sway somewhere along the line. So as an exploration of the ancient world, I think if you are somebody who doesn't know much about this period of history and would really want to know more, I think this is a really lovely way in, especially if you're someone who's interested in the nuts and bolts of history rather than dates and names and battles. And I mean, don't get me wrong, I love a good battle. Military history quite fascinates me. But the other thing to say about this book is that Mary Beard's prose is so readable. There's something very conversational about it. You feel as though she is sharing her knowledge with you in a way that doesn't patronise, in a way that is really inclusive. She's the master of the parenthesis. She never goes on long rambling parentheses, but she'll slip in just little bits of information that, if you're not familiar with this period in history, you'll find genuinely really helpful. The other thing I love about the book is the way it's put together in two ways. So she starts off by focusing on a very young emperor called Elagabalus. That's a mouthful, isn't it? And she tells us his story. I'm not going to ruin it for you, but it's really interesting. He's basically a child who becomes emperor and behaves rather like a child a lot of the time. But she will keep returning to him. You know, as the history progresses, as your understanding of the Roman emperors progresses, or the idea, the concept of emperor, she will keep referring back to him, and she does that all the way through. She'll invest you in some, she'll shine a light on some aspect of the ancient Roman world, and then she'll keep returning to it. It's brilliantly structured because it means you don't have to hold as many facts in your head as you might do in other history books that I've read. And I absolutely love the way she does that. I think it's really clever. The final thing that I will mention, this was going to be a really short video. I thought 5 minutes. Just looking at my time counter, it's saying 15. Can't believe I've been talking about this book for 15 minutes. Well, actually, I can. Now, inside the book, if I open it up, you will see that there are illustrations. So it might be photographs, it might be plans, and these are beautifully interspersed through the text, and only ever there to confirm something that she mentions or to illustrate a point. There isn't a single illustration that isn't completely relevant and doesn't actually enhance your understanding of the subject matter. And at the front, yes, we have lots of really, really helpful maps. So there's maps of Mediterranean, there are maps showing you ancient Rome, there are maps showing you where the different emperors lived, etc., etc. And I love that. I've been dipping back and looking at those, even though I've got a reasonably good map in my head. I've still found that very useful. And then right in the centre of the book, there are lots of wonderful, beautiful colour illustrations as well, to add to your enjoyment. So anybody watching this would probably think that Marybeard had sponsored me to do this video. No, couldn't. I've never met the woman, although Simon very sweetly has, and did actually ask her to sign this book for me, so it's a very treasured possession. But anyway, there we go. So I really, really commend this to you. I commend prompt reading to you. Next month, if I remember rightly, February, it is read a book that is a retelling of a myth or legend or of another book. So I suppose, for example, I read recently Tracy Chevalier's retelling of Othello, which is called New Boy, which I really enjoyed. That would presumably fit the criteria, but I've already read that, so I've got to find something else. Anyway, I'm going to go now and stop waffling about Marybeard and actually go and get my nose stuck back in this rather large tome. Yeah, I'm racing through it. I've only been reading it a day or two and I'm already halfway through. That says it all, doesn't it? Take care, everyone. I hope you're enjoying your prompt reading. If you're participating, if you're not participating, well, why not? Please link any of your lovely prompt suggestions below, particularly for next month's prompt. I haven't chosen a book for that yet. And take care. Happy reading, everybody. Bye.